Good morning to those of you who are present. We'll begin our Sabbath School class. Um, this is the last class, or not class, but the last topic, I believe. No, it isn't. Next to the last of this quarter's presentation, focusing primarily on Genesis and the life of Joseph, Jacob, Esau, and from the very beginning, I believe. And so now we are on lesson 12, and this takes us to Joseph's reunion with his brothers in Egypt. And just as a background information, we know that Joseph is now, after having spent a couple of years in prison for a false accusation by his boss's wife, he's out of prison now. He's in the courts, the Egyptian courts. He is now premier, which would be equivalent to vice president, I believe, of Egypt. I don't remember who the Pharaoh was that was in power at the time, but we know that in the preliminaries to his being appointed premier, the Pharaoh had had some disturbing dreams. And the disturbing dreams no one could interpret. And one of his servants who had been let out of prison earlier remembered this person named Joseph, who he was a co-prisoner with, and knew of his capabilities to interpret dreams, because he had interpreted a dream for this ex-prisoner, who was the cupbearer, I believe, to Pharaoh. And so Joseph was brought out of prison at the request of the Pharaoh to interpret this disturbing dream. And that will be the introduction. Before we start with the class, I'm going to have us bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for bringing each of us here safely. We thank you for being present in our class to help us to understand the significance, not only historically, of the life of Joseph, but how it is applicable to us presently. We ask that you guide our conversations, help us to respect one another's understanding, and we ask your presence in our study. In thy son's name, amen. Okay. So the background I just gave you a little bit of. Is there anybody else who wants to contribute to the background of this lesson? Joseph, who is now the premier of Egypt in a prosperous time, but things are going to go south in a short while. So, Nick, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add that maybe that would have been in the discussion, but I want to bring it up now, that the lesson writer brings it this way, that Joseph becoming a prime minister, one of the key reasons was not that he was an interpreter of dreams. The most key is that he had a solution to the problem that was going to be in Egypt. This is what excited the Pharaoh most. And another new thing that came to me is there's this thought that maybe the Pharaoh had known of Joseph before. If he was the manager of Potiphar's property, and the Pharaoh must have known Joseph, maybe remotely unknown. And as we are told, that Potiphar knew that he prospered because of Joseph. The same Joseph now comes here, and the Pharaoh say, wow, here is a guy.
That's a very interesting point because The man who had enslaved Joseph, his title was equivalent, I believe, to the chief of police in our terms.
Or the army.
Or what?
Army. Armed forces.
Armed forces.
Yeah.
Okay, chief of armed forces.
Yeah.
So we think of people in our times like Colin Powell, who's now deceased, or some of the others in your own countries who may or may not be deceased, but nonetheless, it was the level of respect that they commanded. And of course, they would have to be known by the president of your country. And certainly here in the U.S., Colin Powell was only not known by the president who appointed him chief of staff and then secretary of state and et cetera, but the world knew who Colin Powell was. So I think it's interesting, Nick, that you bring up that point, that Joseph, his enslavement or employment in the household of Potiphar probably was known to some degree by Pharaoh,
by the prime minister.
but it
by the
did
Pharaoh.
not influence Pharaoh to accept him or call him out of prison to interpret this dream. Yes, go ahead.
What really resonates with me, though, is the fact that here it shows again that God can turn something bad into something very good.
Yeah.
And we have seen how the life of Joseph transpired from his being a dreamer in his family to being sold to the different experience he had as a slave, even in prison, and how God was able to direct his path and bring him through all the challenges. Even so that he was able to be there for his family when they had famine in their country and needed food.
You're right. And so God did turn something horrible into something good. As I was studying this, and I'd like for you to ponder it as well, think of the agony, depression, and hurt that Jacob was going through. He had been lied to by these sons. These sons had to appear before him every day, we presume. And to keep that lie going while they watched their father age, become hunchback, gray-haired, and he must have been wondering, Jacob, must have been wondering all the time, my son Joseph, my son Joseph. The other boys had told him that maybe an animal tore him to shreds. Now, imagine a father or a mother trying to envision what animal could it have been to have torn him apart and leave no trace of his bones. So the lie, I would imagine, had to be perpetrated every year to the dad as he asked questions to the sons. So what happened? And so where were you when he disappeared? Knowing all along that they had fabricated this lie, the brother had been picked up by these slave traders. He's taken to a country he knows absolutely nothing about. And it's a country that at the time was quite wealthy. And the pharaohs, and I was reading at some other point with regards to this. It was not uncommon for foreigners to come into Egypt because of famines or various other things and wherever they came from. And they would sell themselves to be slaves forever just to be fed. Okay, so whether or not Joseph was sold into when the conditions were like it or not, I don't know. But the point is that it would not have been uncommon for a Hebrew person to be a slave or any other nationality to be enslaved in Egypt. The other point I wanted to make with regards to a little history, I've forgotten the name. I believe that the Pharaoh at the time was Ramses II. Ramses II was known to be a great builder, great warrior, and I believe he was the ruler at that time. But nonetheless, we know that God made things happen through these various circumstances. So Joseph rises to power. He has interpreted the dream of the Pharaoh. And Nellie, what was that dream? Give us a brief.
I remember, is this on? I remember that they said this was a double dream because it is certain to happen and it will happen very soon. So there were actually two parts, but they meant the same thing. So the one part was the fat and the thin cows, and the thin cows ate up the fat cows and didn't look any fatter. And then the grain, the full heads of grain, and the very thin, sparse heads of grain, that was the same thing. The sparse heads of grain ate up or destroyed the fat ones and didn't look any bigger. And so, but it was a double dream because, and Joseph said it's certain to happen and it will happen very soon.
That's correct. So two parts to that. And there was to be 7 years of plenty, which was indicative of the fattened animal and grain, etc. And then 7 years of famine. And to bring into Nick's comment earlier, Joseph went to work right away with a solution. And the solution sounded so great to Pharaoh, he said, do it, and do it now. And so can you imagine now this 20-some-year-old kid who's been in prison for 2 years, what does he know about saving?
He's not only in prison 2 years, he's been a slave.
Yes, he's right. A prisoner and enslaved.
A slave.
And so what does he?
And he's a foreigner.
And he's a foreigner,
He
yeah.
doesn't know the place where he doesn't know how things should be done in Egypt. Well,
Exactly.
eh,
So we have to conclude then, as we know before, that Joseph was being guided by God even in these terrible circumstances. Joseph he was sort of smart, you know. He was 17 years old when he was taken into prison to be a slave. He works. He knows how to do math extremely well. He knows how to save, and he knows how to do a lot of things that impressed his previous owner. And now he's doing that and applying that to this heady position that he has, you know. And did it ever occur to you, why isn't Pharaoh didn't ask some of his other courtiers to do this? Is there
I
anywhere
think-
where there is any indication that he even asked them to interpret the dream?
They had not been able to, I understood.
Okay.
They'd already failed him. So here comes this young man, and he says he sees the spirit of the gods in him. And he has no trouble interpreting the dream. He immediately, quietly comes up with what I think would be a good solution, and the Pharaoh's impressed.
Exactly. So God was behind this all along. Yes, sir.
And I think it was part of God's super plan. David was the one who was going to, Joseph was the one who was going to execute that plan.
And you're right. And I think the other thing is that there probably were other people in his court. But when God is in control, sometimes odd things seem to occur. Odd things the way we look at it. And so here this slave now interprets the dream, comes up with the solution, and then he is awarded this high position. Now, Nick and everyone, have you ever considered how much Joseph had to physically change his appearance in order to fit into the courts?
That's
Yes.
a tough one.
Pardon me?
That's a tough one, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he could no longer look like a Hebrew, number one,
Yes.
because he'd be spotted right away. So at some point during his enslavement,
And proof for that, I think he even worked on his accent. How come his brothers at no time suspected he could be a Hebrew, leave alone a brother? How come? They didn't even suspect.
because this is my understanding and thought on it. You know, during that era, if you've seen photographs or drawings of how the Egyptians dressed and conducted themselves. Now, men were shaved bald, and I'm going to use your head as an example. That they didn't wear beards, um, and and they were not a hairy-bodied people. And part of that, I sort of wonder if to cut down on lice infestation. So, or maybe it was just fashion to have it. But nonetheless, Joseph had so changed his appearance through adapting to whatever the dress mores and being in court too, dressing according to the way he was supposed to dress, signet ring. I'm going to say purple robe, but that was the dress of the Romans. So, nonetheless, he was not dressed like a slave anymore. So, here are people from all around coming in asking for help to buy grain because wherever they're coming from, crops have failed and they're near starvation. And so we don't know how many people had already arrived before Joseph's brothers arrived. As I was reading this and studying, I thought about, let's see, what was my note here?
But Sister Bruce, while
Yeah.
you're looking for your verse though, one thing I remember reading last night was that Jacob was the one that initiated his brothers to travel to Egypt to purchase food.
Yeah.
It was his idea,
You're right.
and as a result, his idea led to his brothers identifying and spotting Joseph.
Yeah.
So it all come back to the father and not the brothers that initiated the move.
Yeah, that's true. It was Jacob who initiated the travel to Egypt to secure grain because they were near loss of everything and starvation would be essentially it. But as I was reading this, I thought about and reread Psalms 23. So turn to that, and all of you know what it is. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, and etc. Put Joseph in that position. Put yourself in that position. And I thought of that one, and then also Psalms 34, chapter 34, verse 8 through 10. Can someone find Psalms 34, 8 through 10, and read it out loud?
Oh,
Oh.
taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. There is no want to those who fear him. The young lions lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord shall not lack any good thing.
And what are you reading?
I had Psalm 34, 8 through 10.
Okay, someone else have, the version that I read, it's a little different. Anyone else have that?
I have a New King James Version,
Okay.
and it says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. There is no want to those who fear him. The young lions lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord shall not lack any good thing."
Okay, so here we see Jacob and his family. Now, Jacob has gone through a lot of tragedies. Just think about all those previous tragedies he's gone through. He no longer has the wife he dearly loved. He's saddled with these boys who tricked him. And he's been not run out of a village where they were, but remember the war that he went to with these other guys because of some infraction that his sons had committed on the sons of others. And then Joseph, quote unquote, must have been killed by an animal. So here's proof that he's been killed, this favorite robe that you made for him. So I imagine he held on to that robe for quite a few years after it was given to him. And then, as I say, his wife Rachel dies, and now he has the only love of his life, and that is Benjamin. So these boys go down to Egypt. They present their cause. And Nick, develop more about that particular scenario. They were in Egypt. They are now in the presence of their brother whom they don't recognize, and they are begging for food.
Yeah, the story is very interesting. Just before that, let me make one comment on the, like you find that the Jacob loved Rachel. You all know that. Rachel take time to get a child. Rachel gets Joseph, and much later on was it Manasseh? Got Benjamin. I think then she died, something like that. Yeah. Now you find that the love that made him work for 14 years. The wife has died. The son that, if you check the coat he bought to him, he meant that is now his firstborn, because I think because Rachel in his mind is his first wife.
Yeah.
is his wife, not even first. Now, so this is developed into this love for this so-called firstborn that disappears. Then now, the wife that he loves dies. These guys go to Egypt. When they go to Egypt, the brother Joseph meets them. Dan tells them he's the one. Put them in some quotes mistreatment, and spirit of prophecy is very rich in saying all this Joseph did was testing them. Testing, are these guys the same crooks? Do they give dad a hard time? Do they give my brother, because these are not his brother, do they give my brother a hard time? So the agony goes here. These guys are given food to go with one condition. You are not spies, yes. What kind of family you come from? Where do you come from?
Yeah.
So they say, they reveal about their brother who died. The guy is saying, okay. Then talk about, they have one brother. So he sees a lot of truth in what they're saying.
Yeah.
And that develops the idea of now, one of you, I'll let you go with the food, but one of you must remain.
Yeah.
And you know who remained? Like I said it last week, Simon. Who is Simon? Simon is the guy who wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
Simon he has kept. Very interesting. Like Simon should learn something here.
The other interesting aspect of this to me, which in times past when I've read it, I think I've just read over it. And that was that Joseph had these brothers in prison or in lockdown for about 3 days.
Yeah.
So imagine what he must have been thinking, or the tears he must have been shedding, that now he meets his brothers. And the time that he's using in prayer himself to the God he never gave up on, asking for guidance. How shall I deal with this? You know what they've done to me. And I'm just sort of paraphrasing, God, you know what they did to me. You know they did the wrong thing. How shall I treat my brothers? My father is back in Canaan. They don't have my baby brother. Did they kill him? Will they kill him? Are they telling the truth? And so I'd like to suggest that those 3 days of imprisonment, Joseph was on his knees too, while he was still taking care of court business, with the Pharaoh and getting prepared for this famine that was going to be coming and that sort of thing. And so he presents these accusatory comments and questions. Are you spies? You are spies. You're just here to see where our weaknesses are. And so he doesn't give them a break in that sense, in my mind. And so they are now pleading in their responses. They're actually pleading for their lives. We are not spies, and they go through all of this family history. Well, who would know that history but real brothers? And so they are put aside for those 3 days. And through this encounter, they are forced to admit, at least in themselves, their guilt of having killed their brother, so they feel, or sold him
Actually,
off.
while Joseph was pondering the way you put it, them was the guilt of having sold their brother. That's what they were fighting.
Well, yeah, that's what I was about to say. There was a guilt that they were experiencing.
Yeah.
So they were forced to admit that the other brother is no longer. They didn't say he was dead. He was just no longer. So the implication is that he must be dead. I mean, after all, it's been 20 years, right? So anyway, they confessed in themselves. They experienced the guilt and that sort of stuff. And Joseph, I believe, still has to prove a little bit more, make them prove more. Okay, so hence the indication, I believe this is on Tuesday's lesson, in which Joseph instructs his servant to, okay, supply them with the grain, but in this particular bag, I want you to put this cup. Yeah. And that too was going to be a test. And then after they get so far out of
No, the first one, all the money was put in their bags. When they
yeah,
reached home, they
all the
realized
money that they had paid for the grain was put back. Now, isn't that a kind person to do that? Okay, love, not just kindness, but sheer love.
Yeah.
So the money is given back to them. They aren't aware of it until they get further down out of Egypt. And the servant, Joseph's servants or military comes running after them, makes this accusation, forces them to unload everything, open up the bags, and they see the money, which I'm sure they're surprised at. But then there's this chalice that was valued. And so they are hauled back to Egypt. And then we come to the portion where Joseph now sees his dear brother Benjamin. Can you imagine? I mean, just imagine what you would be like, how you would respond if something similar to this had happened to you. Now, Nellie, would you seek retribution? Nellie, would you seek retribution?
I would most probably.
You would.
Most probably.
Go ahead, Nellie.
I certainly wouldn't feel like I could trust them. I certainly wouldn't want to be close to them, I don't think, ever again.
And that would be your retribution, to deny them to be in your presence. And I think that would be normal for anybody. But look, here is a fella, Joseph, who's been treated terribly by his own family. And they don't even look for him during the 20 years he's gone. And so I'd like to suggest that our friend Joseph had to have had a conversion during that 20-year period too. Because I find it hard to believe that Joseph did not have a lot of anger over those years.
Of course. He must
You know.
have. He
And
must have.
Okay, so that says to me that Joseph had to go through conversion as well before this incident happens with his brothers. So we know what the end story is. He discovers, they come back on their knees, pleading for their lives again, offering themselves, or one of them offering themselves as a ransom, and et cetera, and et cetera. And Joseph now has to say, brothers, this is who I am. I'm sure he doesn't pull off the regalia that he's wearing, but he proves to them somehow, I am your brother whom you sold into slavery, and God has appointed me. And this has happened for a reason, and God has made good out of bad. The other thing is to remember from this lesson too is Satan knew all along who the line that Christ would be born through. He has, from the day he knew that Christ was coming to this earth, been on an active journey with his angels to destroy anything, everything, everybody connected with that lineage. And Joseph is one of those lineage. Jacob is one of that lineage as well. And so Satan thought he was going to be destroying everything, but God is always in control. As we often like to say, God is in control. We have to believe God is in control. Well, you know it in your lives, but in this story, it's a surefire thing. God was in control because God knew what he had to do and had to allow in order for everybody else and everybody else being this family, us, and etc., that his commitment and promise of salvation for the human race offered to all of us, regardless of the number of centuries it would take, was going to happen. Yes, my friend.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is the coat, I'm back to the coat of many colors, meaning that the firstborn was being given to Joseph. You realize that Dan, we are told that Dan, for some reason, is off the record. I've not understood. And therefore, replaced by Manasseh. And there is also no Joseph. Now we have Ephraim. So the 12 tribes become 10 plus Manasseh plus Ephraim.
Right.
The firstborn was to have double share.
Yeah.
Now look at Ephraim and Manasseh as sitting as separate clans.
Yeah.
So that's double share. Another one, the firstborn was also to be the priest of the home.
Yeah.
It ended up to Levi, not to the firstborn Reuben. Now, another thing that the firstborn, Hebrew firstborn, was expected to be the progenitor. Now, in the house of Judah is where you find Jesus coming, and I'm a student of Judah. Remember, Gideon said that we do what? Let's put him here. I'll get him later on in his mind. That didn't work out. Next time was when now Benjamin was to be taken and stay in Egypt. Reuben asked this, that I'm ready to offer my two children. I'm ready to offer he told the father that we have to go for food, we are going to die, so I will offer my two sons. And I think the father says, this stupid boy who slept with my wife, see how he talks carelessly. How my grandchildren? Now Judah still comes and says, I'm ready to take over what? To be the prison instead of Benjamin for the sake of my dad. Some of these are the changes in Judah that makes in Judah the progenitor.
The line of Christ.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that correct? What time is it? Okay, I have how many minutes? 7 minutes. 7? Okay, so I'd like to be able to summarize this, if you don't mind me doing so. These boys and the history of them, they're just trying to save their own neck. But then when Pharaoh offers Joseph prime territory for his family to come to Egypt and live rather than traveling back and forth from Canaan to buy grain or be given grain or whatever. Look at God's intervention in all of this. Look at the fulfillment of prophecy, beginning with, was it Abraham that he told them that his descendants would ultimately end up as slaves in a country they knew nothing about, and told them exactly how many years it would be. And so we see Joseph is the instrument that God uses in spite of all the tragedies that has occurred in this family. And remember this, when they went down to Egypt to live in Goshen, the prime property area, Beverly Hills of Egypt. It was a small number of people. Now, at that time, they didn't necessarily count the women, but they counted the men. 70 people, along with Jacob, went down to Egypt, and they proliferated. And they lived well until there was a change of power in the pharaohs. And hence, we know what the history was. And ultimately, how God still fulfilled his promise to deliver them miraculously, to establish them in Canaan, and to become a nation. He built a nation out of this 70 people with all of this wicked history in their background. Now, apply that to our own individual lives. We're not that much different. We have a lot of baggage. We have to deal with that baggage every single day, including families, for the rest of your natural born lives. And so you come to God, you surrender everything, you let him instruct you and guide you in the manner in which you should be to represent the relationship that you're in with him. And he ultimately works out all of these infractions, fractious people, fractious family members, while at the same time converting your heart and mind and disposition if you let him. Now, I'd like to suggest, in parting, Joseph was not a saint. Joseph had work that had to be done in him. We like to tell the stories to our kids, and it sounds like he forgave his brothers, or he became this very wealthy premier, and he this, that, and the other, and we forget about all the baggage he was still carrying. And then the graciousness of God instructing Jacob to include Joseph's mixed breed children, because he married an Egyptian woman. And we have no indication that she worshiped God. We assume that maybe she did through the influence of Joseph. But nonetheless, those children were included in this 12 tribe of people. God took care of Joseph, Joseph's family, Joseph's extended family, and we presume even generations down. So the promises that God made to Abraham way back when came to fulfillment, despite the fact that Satan was trying to destroy every image of God, and he didn't succeed. Now we're down to my and your time. All of us have had our variations and deviations and all of this sort of stuff, and we still have baggage. But as long as we continue to not just intellectually acknowledge, but ask God to teach us, instruct us to surrender our hearts and minds and lifestyles and baggage, we can become another example of brothers who were converted after they did a horrible thing to their brother. So this is going to end the class, and before I end, I'm going to have Nick pass this envelope around so that we can collect offering, and let's do that rather quickly. I'm sad to say, because we are encroaching upon the 11 o'clock hour, I can't entertain any additional comments, but what I would like to say a plug for is, it would be great if we would consider extending our Sabbath School class after hours, get somewhere together and discuss it, because there's a whole lot more points that all of you would like to make. And I'm not a teacher, but I do talk too much sometimes. So, have we collected everything, Nellie? Pardon me? So, well, you have come in now. As soon as I have closing prayer, we'll begin our 11 o'clock services. Musicians, I'm sorry to encroach upon your time. And so, having said that, all of you have a and let's bow our heads in prayer. So, Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to grant us better understanding in this discussion of your mercy, your love, and how all of that still applies to the promises not only made to those of antiquity, but to those of us who presently surrender our lives to you and wish to be converted and changed, and an example to those whom we have contact with as sinners who have been converted. So thank you, Father, for this opportunity to talk with you, and we ask your continued presence in our services. Amen. For those of you who didn't hear, there are quarterlies for the next